So good morning, everybody. My name is Amalia Freeman. I'm the head of the legal affairs of the SGU. And first of all, I would like to thank Giovanni and the ALIAS project for organizing this very interesting conference. I'm sure it will bring a lot of valuable input both to the SGU and to the program as such. So the topic of today, it's insurance and liability. And with me, I have Roger Sethsson, who is a senior underwriter at Hannover. And he will talk about automation and liability in ATM from an insurance perspective. I also have Anna Masuti, who you know already from yesterday. And she will discuss who should insure against liability. And the topic is very interesting because it's hard to discuss liability without also discussing insurances and involving the insurance companies. Because as we know, and also as we heard yesterday, in the end, it's always the insurance companies that pays and settles the claim. So I would like to give the floor to Roger, please.
Thank you very much, Amalia. And I also would like to thank the ALIAS conference for inviting me here today to Florence, which is a really, really nice place to come to. I think coming from the insurance world, I had a quite tough start yesterday with that big hill that we walked up for. We are not used to that in our society in a way. Automation and liability in ATM from an insurance perspective. I was thinking about, how should I address this? Amalia and I talked. It's a very wide area, also from an insurance point of view. But if you remember the Sukhoi Superjet 100 accident in Indonesia in early May, I think that is, from my point of view, something which is interesting. Just the day after the accident, I received a mail from a plaintiff lawyer, together with other insurers in the world, from Mr. James Healy-Pratt, who is working as a plaintiff lawyer in the US. James Healy-Pratt is also having a background as a claims lawyer, a guy that I have worked with in the past. So he's well known in the insurance market, and he has moved from the insurance side to the plaintiff side. So the day after the accident, he sent out a mail and saying, "Getting to the truth of the Sukhoi Superjet 100 tragedy in Indonesia yesterday will be a challenge. The TCAS system is expressly designed to prevent controlled flight into terrain. Our team in Jakarta have begun their investigations." So I think that is the reality today, that although flight safety are improving and lawyers are having less to do, they are chasing cases and everywhere, not just in the US as in the past. This is, as I understand it, the big question today. The question is whether automation in ATM will shift liability from pilots and air traffic controllers to manufacturers. So let me start with this, so you can get a feeling also for the insurance, one of the angles in insurance. Insurance, from an underwriting point of view, insurance of ATC, that is a class with low frequency and high volatility. The worldwide aerospace premium insurance income is $7 billion US. From that, you have to deduct brokerage and the reinsurance cost, etc., etc. If you look on ATC, how much of that income or premium that is being paid today by ATC, that is probably very close to 1%. That means if there is an aircraft accident, or of all aircraft accidents that the ATC is contributing with having 1% of the losses. If we look on the volatility or the estimated maximum loss or the worst case scenario we are thinking about, then we are looking at a loss of $6 to $7 billion US potentially. Another thing also I think which is important for you to know is that if you talk about shift of liability from the ATC to the manufacturers, then the policies that an ATC company or air navigation service providers are buying is on an any one occurrence basis. So it means that if there are 10 losses in a year, every loss will be paid by the insurers. There is no aggregation of the amounts being paid up to the policy limit. When you compare to the manufacturers, if there is a product defect in the system, the manufacturer have an aggregated limit, and as it can take 10, 20 years before we know exactly the allocation of liability, then I would say that that's a big uncertainty if all the liability was going to the manufacturer, because they need to, of course, to buy much more policy limits in my view. Okay. I think this is an interesting slide from the perspective of what is insured in ATC if we talk about upper airspace, because it's very difficult to talk about tower and insurers on ground, and who is buying and who is not. This is our picture. I'm not saying it's 100% correct, but as you can see, North America or USA are not buying ATC insurance. France is not buying. Yes. And actually, I should have said that if I didn't say it, the blue areas are insured and the white are uninsured. So talking about flight safety, I thought it was also worth to mention to you how we look on risks in the aviation insurance market. This is a slide that shows something called total loss factor. In our system, which has a tradition going back to 1970, where we keep track of every aircraft in the world and all the accidents, we take the number of total losses and major partial losses in a year and divide that with the number of aircraft in service. Then we get a probability for a total loss. Then, of course, you have big differences between geographical areas, big difference between generation of aircraft and so on. But that's another phase in our rating tool. I think the message here is that, of course, insurance markets are seeing that the technology has improved and helped to improve the flight safety a lot with systems like TCAS and etc. And we think also, I think most people think that going forward, the trend is going to continue. If you look on liability, you may know this already, but of course, underwriters are very keen to know where the exposure is. So if we talk about North America, we are talking about the settlement of a passenger to an average settlement, $5.5 million US. So I talk about average, and that's our view. We are seeing cases where we pay $20 million US for one passenger. In Europe, we have recently actually increased the settlements, our view on settlements in Europe, from $1 million US to $1.5 million US. And we are seeing it's not the same level of awards in Europe as in US, but we are seeing a trend where losses are getting more expensive. So, talking about accidents and what we can learn from the insurance world about accidents. I'm not going to go into details on these accidents, but just I've looked on the most expensive accidents since 1980, where manufacturers in a way have been involved. So I like to highlight a couple of examples from in the 80s and the 90s and the last decade. In 1985, if you remember, Japan Airlines, Flight 123, which was a domestic flight with 520 passengers that crashed into a mountain, and the reason for that was that they lost the tail fin, and the tail fin, or part of the tail fin, the reason for that was actually a faulty repair following an what you call it, a, let me see, sorry. Well, they have had an incident with the aircraft, I think, in 1978, so 7 years earlier. They had an incident where they damaged the tail, and the repair was faulty. So the aircraft crashed, and of course the manufacturer were to a high degree involved in the loss, but it had nothing to do with automation in a way. If you look on the next, sorry, go back. I should also mention the second biggest loss was Sioux City, a DC-10, where there was an engine fan disc that separated and damaged the tail as well. And the aircraft crashed. More people survived in that accident. I think it was like 100 people that were, 118 people that were killed, and some 200-300 people that survived. But it was a very, very expensive case. And again, manufacturers were involved to a high degree, but not automation. In the 90s, I would like to start with an accident which everyone from Sweden, I think, is aware of. What we call the miracle in Gottröra, I think the name was, where an aircraft from Scandinavian Airlines, an MD-80, crashed just after takeoff from Stockholm. All on board survived. The aircraft took off with clear ice on the wings, which then was ingested into the engines. The engines surged, destroyed the engines, not the ice. This accident might have been avoided if the pilots had been aware of Automated Thrust Recovery System, ATR. The pilots were not trained to identify and eliminate engine surgings. And ATR, the ATR system, was unknown within SAS. And it was activated and increased the engine power without the pilot's knowledge. So if the pilot had been aware and trained for this, they could have reduced the power on the engine and perhaps gone back and landed the aircraft safely. So this is probably a loss which you have heard a lot about. China Airlines, it involves automation. And it involves human error and lack of training again. And this was an Airbus 300, I think it was, that just before landing, the pilot made a mistake to press the takeoff, go around button, TOGA. And at that time, the computer, it was not possible for the pilot to override the computer. And I think Airbus changed the design after this. But that is, well, an automated-related and a very expensive loss that we saw in the market, which had, to a certain degree, an involvement by the manufacturers. So, if we look, since the millennium shift, I wish to highlight two accidents. The first one is the Turkish Airlines accidents near Schiphol, Amsterdam in 2009. The preliminary investigation found that the crash was caused primarily by the aircraft automated reaction, which was triggered by a malfunctioning radio altimeter. This caused the auto throttle to reduce the engine power to idle during approach. The crew noticed this too late to take appropriate actions to increase the throttle and recover the aircraft before it stalled and crashed. The only thing I would say here is, of course, this is a loss which is very much discussed in the insurance market, and I cannot go into the liability discussion. But I think one thing that we are seeing is that, you know, from the manufacturers and the airlines' point of view, they are trying to solve this as quickly and as best in a short time. But it, yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's just a preliminary report, so we don't know really the final outcome. There is a lot, as always, speculation in the newspaper, you know, what caused this loss. We will see when the final report is coming. And this one, of course, finally, talking about automation, which everyone in the insurance world are talking about right now, is the Air France Flight 447. The final report on this accident will be released next month, I think on 5th July. But of course, there are a number of possible reasons behind this. And I can say during the last 2 years, myself and other people who work with insurance have attended a lot of meetings with several parties that have been involved, from the airlines to the pilots. And the discussion has been very much about certification requirements of pitot tubes, for example, training, a lot of focus on training and recovery after a stall. And I think this, depending on the outcome on this accident, that could have an impact on the manufacturers, or insurance of manufacturers. I'm not saying that is going to be an Airbus problem, but you know, if Airbus are successful to protect their products, that's of course is very good for the manufacturers. So we have to wait and see. So let's look on air traffic control. And as I said in the beginning of the presentation, we have seen very few major losses coming out from ATC. On the other hand, I'm talking about insured ATC. I think it's fair to say that it's only during the last 5 to 10 years that many air navigation service providers have bought insurance. So a lot of these areas that you saw before that were blue insured were not insured 10 years ago. So therefore, not being insured, we don't know the liability on those losses. So there have been 6 significant accidents in the last 11 years where ATC has been partly liable. The total number of fatalities equals 392. So I think that's an interesting figure, because there has not really been, you know, it's a tragedy, these losses, but there has not been any losses on the level that I have been talking about, mid-air collision involving, to say, wide-bodied aircraft. We have had aircraft involving a smaller aircraft and a bigger aircraft, and a car and an aircraft, but not, you know, these really catastrophic losses that we are talking or are afraid of. 2 of these losses were uninsured, but the overall incurred loss amount for these losses, so I'm talking about the airline, the manufacturers, the air traffic control, is $1.145 billion, of which 89% has been paid. So these claims in general have been paid quite fast in comparison with the way when there has been a manufacturing defect, which could take 20 years before we know exactly the allocation of liability. So this, to me, it's a little bit faster settlements of the claims into ATC than manufacturers in general. If you look on the allocation, you know, of the liability between the parties, well, the operators are paid 67%, the airport 4%, ATC 18%. I should say that these claims, I think you're very familiar with all of them. I'm not going to go through them, but or maybe I can, you know, Lenati, everyone knows. I know that you talked about Ubelingen. Toronto in Canada, there was an Airbus that landed in very bad weather. And one of the theories, I'm not sure if it's true, was that the pilot felt that the ATC were responsible to stop, to not allowing aircraft to land if the weather was bad. So when you read these claims reports, sometimes you get surprised to see that what people are saying. And then Lexington in Kentucky in US was an aircraft that took off from the wrong runway. It was early in the morning, and the pilot, and it was dark, and it was only one controller in the tower. It should have been two, and everything went wrong for them, and they took off from a small runway for GA and crashed at the end of the runway. And that, what is interesting with that case is that the US government, FAA, contributed with 22% of the liability. So, and GOL, I'm going to mention that on my next slide. And in Romania, there was an incident, an accident in Bucharest, where a Tarom aircraft almost hit a vehicle that was on the runway. From the insurance point of view, what we are seeing is there were no passenger that were injured, but we have something called post-traumatic distress, PTSD, and that type of claims we are seeing. And in this case, the passengers, want to have compensation for this distress, and it's quite a big amount. That's what I can say. So, I also want to mention GOL, and I'm not sure if everyone in here are aware of the GOL accident, but no? Okay, this was a mid-air collision between the Brazilian airline GOL and a business jet aircraft from an Embraer business jet aircraft, I can say, from demonstration or delivery flight from Brazil that collided with this passenger aircraft. So when I looked on the final accident reports, the Brazilian CENIPA and the US NTSB, they had conflicting conclusions what caused the accident. And as I said, at this time, the Brazil was, I didn't say that, but Brazil was uninsured. They didn't buy insurance for ATC at this time. So the CENIPA concluded that the accident was caused by the air traffic controllers and by the American pilot. NTSB blamed the Brazilian ATC systems and the controllers and added that the TCAS systems contributed to the accident. And actually, by mistake, the theory is that the pilot, by mistake, switched off the TCAS system and was not aware of it. But when you read this report and the discussions that have been in the market has been also very much about the quality of the Brazilian ATC system. And for example, the controller was not qualified. One of the controllers that was involved in this accident was not qualified for the job. And he had failed the exams several times. And that's what these type of accidents we are seeing also on other airline losses, which relates to training and qualification. Last year, we discussed in the insurance market annual general meetings where we meet the Colgan accident in US, where an aircraft stalled and where the pilot had, the captain and the co-pilot had very little experience and they did not actually understand, what was happening with aircraft. So a lot of focus has been on training, when we discuss claims. Okay. So am I taking more time? I need probably to speed up a little bit, or? Okay. Yes. So just so what do insurers think about automation and liability? Well, last week I met a lot of them and we were discussing this, and I tried to summarize, the sort of reaction I got. Some believe that the systems manufacturer will have more liability, obviously. Others were saying that if the controllers had all the information and the plaintiff lawyer will always ask, why didn't you do anything? And another question is, about if it is something happens, is it a human error or a system error if, for example, the controller misread the information? And I'm going to be very short on this because Amalia asked me to talk about, how we handle claims, and you can perhaps ask questions afterwards. But I'm not a claims person, so that should really be addressed by a lawyer. But what I can say that is there are a lot of discussions in the insurance market about best practice. How can we as a community act together with the ATC manufacturer airline to reduce the overall liability and make it, a smooth claims handling? These cases, take many years to handle, and legal fees is a big burden for everyone. But there are a lot of discussions in the market now, and the trend is that, people are focusing how to improve the situation in handling claims. There are three things I just wanted to say about claims handling. First of all is, you have to define a strategy. And that, of course, depends on various analyses: technical analysis, legal analysis, financial analysis. Then you have to implement it. And then, depending on the strength of your case, you can settle out of court, go to court, mediate or arbitrate. Those are the ones. So the conclusions. Automation will continue to improve safety. Training will be a key factor. A groundbreaking shift of liability from operators to manufacturers remain to be seen. Thank you.